They shouldn't be dictating what you're supposed to be doing.
Now, as far as the judiciary is concerned, when judges issue rulings, they are dictating what you're supposed to be doing and not supposed to be doing if they determine that you are breaking the law. Of course, that's how the legal system works, and the recourse is to appeal those rulings. My lead source tonight is the Democratic Senator of Connecticut, Chris Murphy. And Senator Murphy, as we look at the developments that have happened in the last 48 hours, what are your concerns about this moment that we're at with the courts, with the president, and with this suggestion from two of his top advisors that maybe they defy the court's rulings?
Yeah, listen, I mean, this isn't hyperbole to say that we are staring the death of democracy in the eyes right now. The centerpiece of our democracy is that we observe court rulings, criminal court rulings, civil court rulings, and constitutional court rulings. No one is above the law. And whether we like it or not, the courts interpret the law. So, yes, throughout the history of the United States, the courts have made rulings on when the executive branch is exercising legal power and when they are going beyond the power that they have, either constrained by statute or by the Constitution, just as they regularly rule on whether or not individuals have complied with the law or violated the law, whether those be civil laws or criminal laws. If the President of the United States says, you know what, I don't care what the courts say, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, that's essentially the end of the rule of law, because if the president isn't bound by our laws and the Constitution, then why would anybody else be bound by our laws and the Constitution? This is a really dire moment. And no, so far they've been talking tough, but I think largely have complied with these court orders. I think there's going to be a question as to how well they've complied with the orders. But if they were to outright ignore an order, as J.D. Vance and Elon Musk are suggesting, that is maybe the greatest challenge to our democracy in any of our lifetimes.
But you're saying we're not there yet, basically.
Well, listen, on this specific question of whether or not they are prepared to openly violate a court order, we are not there. They are not complying with the existing court orders, but they are in partial compliance. But if they were to openly declare that because they disagree with, for instance, a court's order to reopen USAID or to get Elon Musk out of the Treasury Department, simply because on the merits they disagree with the court's ruling, then you are clearly in the most serious constitutional crisis, arguably of the last 100 years.
And so what happens? I just want to game this out. If that happens, and you're saying that you don't think it has yet, then what's next? If they do defy a court order, and it's not just a tweet or a Truth Social post, it's them telling a judge, we think you're wrong, we're not going to comply with this, then what happens?
Well, I mean, listen, I am not an active practice lawyer, but the first thing you would do would be to go back to the court and hold the administration or the individuals who are not complying in contempt. And there are a series of remedies that the court can order if someone is in contempt, including jailing them. So there is a series of escalatory steps.
But who would be responsible for enforcing that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's law enforcement. So there's where you get in trouble. This is why somebody like J.D. Vance has suggested that there may be no remedy ultimately for a violation of a court order, because it would be law enforcement in control of the executive branch that may ultimately have to enforce the order. So therein lies the crisis that ultimately becomes a civil and political crisis for the country. Listen, let's hope we don't get there. Let's hope that this is bluster. I argue that we're already in a version of a constitutional crisis, because you have the widespread endorsement of violence in this country. You have the president trying to openly violate the law, only being constrained by the courts. I think this is a crisis already. It gets even deeper if they decide that they are going to openly and transparently not cooperate and not follow a court order.
What do you say to the two arguments that have been made to me today as I've been talking to people on this? Is one, Trump supporters, Americans elected Trump, that he had promised this on the campaign trail, that they were going to do this with Elon Musk and go into the federal government and essentially carry out this efficiency mandate that he's been arguing they have? And two, what the other part that I've heard is, will President Biden, push student loans and chided the Supreme Court and criticized them and still, tried to go around that and eliminate as much student debt as he could? What would you say to those two responses that I've heard from Trump's allies?
Well, first, I don't think the American people voted to have Elon Musk get access to all of their tax data, Social Security, Medicare data in order to enrich himself. I'm not sure that the American people voted for that. But it is just not true that President Biden did not comply with court orders. There were several things that President Biden did that the courts ruled were either illegal or unconstitutional. He suspended those operations. There were things that President Obama did that the courts ruled were unconstitutional. He suspended those actions and operations. Up until now, whether presidents agreed with the court rulings, presidents have observed the court rulings. And every single president, Republican and Democrat, has had a court weigh in and say that something that they were trying to do was beyond the authorization they are granted by statute or the Constitution. This would be the first time, again, certainly in our lifetime, that a president has just decided to ignore the courts. Every president has a battle with the courts. Every president criticizes the courts, but they comply with the court orders.
And how will you know when we're there, if the U.S. gets to that point? People are going to be asking themselves that question tonight.
Well, I mean, right now you have arguably a president who is not in compliance with these orders. For instance, the court said that he can't cut off funds to agencies and states where Congress directed money to flow. He has turned back on some of those streams of funding, but not all. And so today, a court in Rhode Island said, listen, Mr. President, we mean it when you say that you can't unilaterally withhold these funds. Again, if he were to continue to ignore even this latest ruling today, it's possible that he or some of his staff will be held in contempt. And if then they refuse to enforce those contempt orders, we are in the middle of a very dire constitutional crisis. And again, I think the place we're in now is pretty dire. The fact that the administration has decided to weaponize political violence, has hinted and signaled that it's going to pardon anybody who's been accused of serious crimes just because they're politically friendly to the president. That's a crisis in and of itself. This would be a bigger one if they openly violate court orders.
Senator Chris Murphy, thank you for your time tonight.